Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the second session of the second day of the 2023 North American Virtual Reference Conference. I'm Jennifer Cox, Virtual Reference Coordinator of Answerland, the statewide reference service administered by the State Library of Oregon. I'll be your moderator for this session. Attendees, your video and audio have been turned off for this session. If you have a question, please use the Q&A section. There will be time allowed at the end of the presentation for questions. This session will be recorded and made available on the North American Virtual Reference Conference website where you registered within the next month. So for this session, we have two lightning round presentations. Each presentation will last 20 minutes and we'll have a combined 10 minutes for Q&A after both presentations have been made. Our presentations today are Digital Relations, Creating Virtual Reference Tools for Gender Diverse, Two-Spirit, and Indigiqueer, pardon me, tongue twister there a little bit for me. Students presented by Alexandra, Alisauskas, pardon me as I butcher your name, and Sydney Burton. The second presentation is entitled Ready, Set, Oh No, Prepare for Possible Online Accessibility Issues Before They Arise, presented by Jessica D. Gilbert, Redman, and Beth, Valentine. Without further ado, I will hand it off to Alexandra and Sydney.
Great, thank you, Jennifer and Carla. Can you all hear me okay? I just realized we didn't do an audio test, so. Okay, Sydney is going to share our presentation, I think.
Yeah, I'm just
Awesome.
pulling it up now.
Oh.
And I'm just going to enter into presenter view. Can you see it there?
No, we're seeing the notes. Sorry, we should have tested this out.
There, try that.
There we go. Awesome. Thank you, Sydney. Cool. Okay, so hi, everyone, and welcome to our session today. My name is Alisauskas, and I'm a learning and engagement librarian at Libraries and Cultural Resources at the University of Calgary, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm going to let Sydney introduce themselves.
And I am Sydney Burton, and I am the Indigenous Student Library Assistant at the University of Calgary and a PhD candidate in the Department of Classics and Religious Studies, and I use she, they pronouns.
All right, so today we're just going to tell you, actually, I want to just acknowledge the lands we are joining you from today, known in Blackfoot as Mokinsis, or where the Elbow and Bow River meet, which unfortunately doesn't look like this today. We had a bit of a snowpocalypse, but happier times, and where Calgary and the University of Calgary is located. We also just want to give thanks again to the conference organizers for having us here today. We've been enjoying the session so far, and also a sincere thank you and gratitude to two kind of units on campus that we've been working with to design this tool we're going to be talking about today, the Q Center, which I'll tell you more about, and the Writing Symbols Lodge, who've given us a lot of feedback and guidance. So our goal for today is to share a bit about a virtual reference tool and project we developed at the library at the University of Calgary to address the needs of gender diverse, two-spirit, and Indigiqueer students. So first, we're just going to give a bit of the context for the project, including our specific context at the University of Calgary and a really important part of the process, which was our consultation with the Q Center, the Queer Center on campus. Now, a key theme that emerged in our consultation and discussions was the need for any tool to be designed specifically with the needs of queer and gender diverse users in mind, and particularly the importance of physical and digital safety. So Sydney will talk about some of the further research they did on online spaces and UX considerations for queer and gender diverse users. We'll then talk about how these considerations help shape our decision-making around what platform or kind of tool we were going to create, and sort of walk you through some of the options we had. And then a quick preview of a virtual tour that we are almost finished, but we're hoping would be done, but still has some finishing touches on it. And then we'll finish by talking about some key takeaways from this project that we hope can help you if you're embarking on a similar kind of project. All right, so first, a bit of context. The University of Calgary is a research university located in the city of Calgary, which is a city of about 1.5 million, and it's the primary research institution in southern Alberta. The context in the province of Alberta is important to note, right? So post-secondary institutions are currently in a quite challenging budget environment. We have a very conservative government. And related to our topic today, there have been many kind of public debates, protests in regard to the expression of gender and sexual diversity in the province, including in Calgary, in many prominent ones in recent weeks. So libraries and cultural resources, or LCR, at the University of Calgary, where we both work, is a converged center on campus that incorporates 7 library branches, archives, rare books and special collections, 2 art galleries, and a university press. It's also a very student-centered academic library with broad and diverse programming for students at all levels. So one example of a project we work on is the My Librarian program, a personal librarian program, which connects students to individual librarians based on their academic subject, but also they can seek out librarians based on language spoken or connect to a librarian based on lived experience. So for instance, a queer gender diverse student could find a way to connect with a librarian who has LGBTQIA2S+ experience or interest. We also have a wealth of resources on the topics of gender and sexual diversity, including a fantastic collection of young adult books in our education library, large graphic novel collection, popular nonfiction books, as well as archival materials about the queer and gay history in Calgary. And as I'm a liaison to gender and sexuality studies at LCR. So I help students in that academic program access these various resources. And every time I would tell them about all the wonderful things we have, they'd be endlessly surprised. So that was something I really wanted to highlight to students. Also, Sydney was interested in creating resources around Two-Spirit materials in the library. And so together we decided we wanted to make some sort of program or tool to let students know about the many kinds of resources available to them in an academic library, and which could affirm their experiences as queer, trans, and Indigiqueer students on campus. All right, so we wanted to hear more about the specific needs of students at UFC, and as the gender studies librarian, I had long wanted an excuse to get in touch with the Q Center here on campus, which had been closed during the pandemic and which reopened in 2022. So the Q Center is an organization run by our student union, and it aims to be a safe, comfortable, and inviting space for LGBTQIA2S+ community members at the UFC. And while it's a space to hang out and socialize, as you can see, very warm, welcoming space, it has also helped facilitate name changes for concerned students. And it offers a queer mentoring program that works towards student solutions surrounding coming out, identity, health, wellness, relationships. So we met with the coordinator of the Q Center to discuss what are some things that the library might do to help support queer and gender diverse students on campus. And out of that conversation came many important points. They shared that they were unaware of the many collections we had or even digital services, and unaware that there was even a gender studies librarian. So bonus, we built that relationship out of this. That was a great outcome. They also expressed concerns with the physical space of the library, namely that there are no gender neutral restrooms and the lack of a presence of any permanent signs of support for queer and gender diverse students in either our physical or virtual environment. So no flags, pride flags, no statements of inclusivity. And a key concern they shared that sort of shaped how we moved our project forward was that the library website did not include aspects of digital safety that might be important for queer and gender diverse students, such as quick exit buttons so user can quickly navigate away from any content that might out them or make them feel unsafe if somebody around them were to see it. And more broadly, they shared the need for tools that would allow discrete browsing both physically and online to ensure safety and privacy. So this aligned with some of the research we'd been doing in the literature around academic library services to support queer, trans, and Indigiqueer patrons. We were really inspired by Rachel Wexelbaum, who argues that safe online spaces can help alleviate discomforts around physical spaces and provide a safe and viable option to ease students into the library. So our goal after this conversation was to create a tool that would help overcome some of these structural and physical barriers, kind of an alternate way of navigating, and create an experience where queer and gender diverse students would feel safe to explore, both in person and online, and gain greater awareness of materials and services available to them relevant to their lived experiences. I'll pass it on to Sydney to talk about the process we went through of looking more into designing the online tools and the decision-making process about how we got to the virtual tool we ended up creating.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alex. So After we consulted with the Q Center, we moved pretty quickly into trying to compile some sort of literature review to see what kind of spaces people are gravitating towards, both physical and online. We quite quickly discovered that the LGBTQIA2S+ community really tended to build communities online, particularly surrounding different intersections if they were from smaller communities, and also if they were looking for new spaces as well to be able to connect with different sorts of people. So with this in mind, we started moving forward on looking towards how to create those safe spaces. And this was particularly applicable for a university community because as new students are congregating, coming into campus, they needed a place to be able to kind of look around and see where they could find the resources and where to make community. So the tool that we decided to build doesn't necessarily have a community building feature, but we do try to provide them with some of those resources and places where they can reach out to find those areas. We also realized pretty quickly that there is quite a number of intersections when it came to the LGBTQIA2S+ community with different neurodivergence, as well as some like mental struggles. So we knew that we wanted to try and integrate videos or 360 tours of the library to have people become more comfortable in the physical space before they decided to actually come into the library so that they could prepare themselves, know where things were located. So when we decided to then build into our user experience a number of these different realities, whether that was like a mixed reality or a video to get people used to where things were located, we started researching more about queer user experience, and there's quite a large body of queer user experiences out there. And one of the main takeaways was that they didn't want to flatten identities. And even though this is very difficult to do when it comes to creating a tool, using gender neutral language, acknowledging that identities can kind of become flattened, and then trying to find ways to circumnavigate that by providing a variety of different terminologies and resources became very important for us. The benefit of creating the tool in the way that we did is also so that we can kind of circumnavigate what the experience of some of these students of having to go into a library and stand in a shelving area where some of the Library of Congress cataloging systems and the even Dewey Decimal for our education library categorizes things in not ideal ways. And so this allowed us to really decolonize our collection, as well as have an opportunity to continually update it as regional terms, as community terms in general started to evolve. So that became another core goal for us with this tool. We also wanted to make it look as neutral as possible. We didn't want to come out with a bunch of rainbows with in mind that some students may not have a safe space to be browsing this tool. And so having a neutral design, as well as having quick exit options for students so that they didn't have to immediately have a different browser open to switch between if someone who did not agree with what they were researching popped up, became very important, as well as providing a whole range of resources, whether that was identity-based, whether that was, as Alex mentioned, graphic novels and the like. So after all of this research, our goal immediately, the primary goal became the digital safety, as well as incorporating places for students, whether they were Indigenous, whether they were Indigiqueer, whether they had a different intersection with LGBTQ to kind of find their space online. So the first thing that we decided to kind of explore was story maps. And this for us specifically meant the ArcGIS story map tool. We immediately thought of using a land-based approach because we assumed that we would be able to integrate space and narrative into one convenient packet. But what we quickly found was that story maps was almost too limiting for the scope that we wanted for this project. So even though we liked some of the features and some of the multimedia content, we wanted something that was more comprehensive, but that also let us build in those quick exit features and other safety features. Then we went down a rabbit hole of augmented, virtual, or mixed reality. And neither of us are coding whizzes. And this on top of the complexity of the actual augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality to some extent, it kind of made us shy away a little bit. It wasn't as accessible as we wanted it to be, nor did it allow for those quick exit options. We didn't want a student to be stuck on their phone having to try and navigate the library with an augmented reality tool, or having to have a headset on to some degree to be able to navigate our systems. So even though we may eventually branch out into this to some degree, this did not fit our current tool. So we actually landed on ThingLink, and this is something that our library has used quite a lot, but in different ways. So rather than providing a tool that specifically hauled out I guess, different information, we kind of multi-layered this tool to be easily updated, but also to use like regional terminology and to integrate mixed media, to integrate ideas of story mapping, to integrate ideas of safety, and really walk patrons through how they can be as safe as possible when exploring some of these ideas. And the great thing about ThingLink is that it is super accessible, so we can include all text, we have audio options. When we were creating the tool, we actually specifically made it so that it was in sans serif. We adjusted the text spacing to be 0.12 in between like the letters and 0.5 between the lines, so that anyone who had any sort of reading issues or anything along those lines was easily accessible for them. And we could update it as our actual resources updated as well pretty quickly, faster than what a call number or subject update could do. So here are some slides that kind of came out of this. On the left there, this is kind of the intro page, and it includes a how to use a page. So one of the safety features we actually built into this was teaching people how to use private windows and incognito mode if they so choose. Every single page has this big black button up on the right-hand side with an X through it. And on the right upper corner, you'll see the neutral page it goes to. So rather than it bringing you to an entirely different page, which might flag someone who's standing behind you that you're quickly exiting out of something, it's pretty much the exact same page, just without any of the queer material, so that it looks like you haven't completely deviated and are trying to hide something. We also included a few pages down here. We've got our library resources page. Each of those goes to a separate area and separate section. We also have a virtual resource page, and this is still a work in progress. So we have our library tours, which are right now 360 tours of our library, but we're hoping that we can actually take some videos and go to the specific locations where some of this queer material and intersections with queer material are actually located. So that's the tool, more or less. You can also navigate back several pages. We are also hoping to build out into a subject guide so that we can relate how to search with the old terminology that some of the material might be underneath, might be cataloged under, sorry, to newer ideas and newer terminology, as well as trying to find some of that hidden material where there are intersections with LGBTQ2S+ communities. So those might be intersections with mental health, they might be intersections with neurodivergence or race or ethnicity, any of those types of ideas to make it easier to navigate. And so we have our main takeaways. Consulting with the intended users is really key. It's important to take into consideration the region and the area that you are, what your user base is, because terms change, ideas change, and your intersections might change as well that you might want to focus on depending on where you are. It's very important to incorporate digital safety and accessibility, particularly to make students and your users more comfortable using the actual tool. And once they see that you are considering their safety when integrating that and preparing them to actually come into the physical space, then hopefully you can bridge that gap between just a purely online user to someone who feels more comfortable actually coming into the space itself to do their research and to ask for help. And also to consider what resources might be useful for the various intersections in your area. For example, we have highlighted our sensory rooms for those who might be feeling overwhelmed, outlined our subject headings and primary resource headings so that we acknowledge that some of these ideas are antiquated, but here is how we are choosing to refer to them. We just might need to use that terminology to get the information that you need. And to continually check back in with the community that you've made this tool for in order to be able to edit it for their updated needs. So thank you so much. That is our presentation.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jessica and Beth. Feel free to upload or get your slides on your screen, and I'm going to mute.
Hello, everyone. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that technology was cooperating today. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to the organizers for putting this event together. Today, Jessica and I will be discussing our process and procedures for evaluating the digital accessibility of various digital resources, whether that be software or an online journal subscription. So my name is Beth Valentine, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm actually not a librarian. I work in the Equal Opportunity and Title IX office. My official title is Equity Compliance and Education Manager, and I also serve as the Deputy ADA Coordinator.
And I'm Jessica Gilbert Redman. I am a librarian. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also at the University of North Dakota in the med school as the online resources and services librarian. So we're kind of interdepartmentally cooperating.
Mm-hmm.
This is a quick overview of our process. We wanted to show you from start to end everything that happens, from discussions with the vendors to internal processes to how we notify the public, even to planning ahead for issues that we think might arise so that we have some things in place for that. We're going to talk about each of these steps individually today. It's important on your end to maintain a process so you don't forget any of the steps as you're walking through them. And the one that I think is most often forgotten is probably the looking ahead, the mitigation. But before we delve into that, Beth is going to give us an overview of necessary terms and definitions.
Yes, and I want to start with an ACR, or an Accessibility Conformance Report. So this is what you're going to be asking your vendors for, and all it is a completed VPAT. Sometimes they'll be more familiar with that term, the VPAT instead of the ACR. And a VPAT is just a voluntary product accessibility template. And that's just a template, a document that's used in evaluating how accessible software is, websites are, basically any information and communication technology. There's a couple different versions. So the EN version is used by the EU. So if you have any European vendors, they might have that on hand. What we use is revised 508, and that refers to Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, revised, and that's the US standard. So the Section 508 has information for software, hardware, and websites, and it incorporates by reference the WCAG standards, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Sometimes when we're communicating with vendors, we might have some of them ask, this is software, not a website. Why do I have to bother with the Web Content Guidelines? And the answer to that is pretty simple. If you look at revised Section 508 standards, there literally is a line there that says see WCAG. So that's a pretty good response. You'll have access to our slide deck and also to our handout in the resources. So the revised Section 508, revised EN, WCAG, etc. All of those hyperlink out to the templates for you to take a closer look. Another key term is accessibility. And this big long quote up there comes from the Office for Civil Rights of the Department of Education. And that's the definition that they've been using in the reconciliation agreements fairly recently and fairly consistently across a couple of different universities. Here's a shorter definition. So accessibility is providing equitable access so that individuals, regardless of their ability status, can fully and independently use programs, services, resources, and facilities. And this is our goal when we go throughout our process to make sure that the stuff that we are investing in can be used by all of our users.
And it's important to let your vendors know that accessibility is important, right? So we have added some sample language to the handout that Beth mentioned, which is also uploaded on our presentation page in Sketch, to help you keep that communication open and answer some of these questions that you're going to get from vendors. And if you don't know the answers, don't be afraid to reach out. There are, e-resources listservs, or even the ALA listserv or community boards, to ask how others are communicating with their vendors, even to the point of a specific vendor. If there's a specific vendor that you're just getting a lot of pushback from, one thing you can do if they are resistant is try explaining the importance of accessibility just as a whole. But if your organization has a particular guideline or standard, you can point them to that. There are, of course, Beth mentioned the legal standards that are just part of the law that we need to follow. But even above and beyond that, they just need to, it's just important, even if it weren't the law. And there also can be a reinforcement in your own organization for talking to vendors. I know I have reached out to Beth in the past and said, okay, this vendor is asking this question. I've answered it this way. They're still asking it. What are your thoughts? And so we can bounce things off of each other. And so if it's important to have that supplemental information in mind as you're moving ahead. Like, where can I go if these things happen? Because you'll just be ready for it when you're talking to your vendors. After I request the ACR and answer any vendor questions, I look it over and then it goes to Beth as a part of our internal review.
Mm-hmm. And before I talk about what I do for the ACR, I do want to echo something Jessica said. Reaching out to others in your organization can be very helpful if you have a vendor that doesn't want to complete the form. So sometimes if they've been communicating a lot with Jessica, I can come in and just the fact that I have, ADA coordinator in my title, or that I'm the Equal Opportunity in Title IX office, even though Title IX has nothing to do with this, sometimes that can give a reaction, a more positive reaction. So think about who in your own organization you can reach out to, whether that be your ADA coordinator or someone else in another office or within your own office. So once Jessica gets the ACR from the vendor, my first step is always to verify the basic information. Is it for the correct product? Sometimes you get a VPAT for a different product. Companies have a lot of them. They send you the wrong thing. Make sure it uses a correct VPAT. There are a couple of different forms. And also make sure that the review was recently completed. In our policy, redefine recently as within the past 2 years. I'll be honest, during COVID years, I might have stretched that to 3. But really anything much older than that, it's not going to be recent. It's not going to be up to date. You need to ask for something. Ideally, like I said, within 2 years. If you can get them to give you something within 1 year or less, even better. The next thing that I do and that I recommend anyone doing, particularly if they're short on time or this is kind of the first time reviewing an ACR, is to look at Chapter 3 of the Functional Performance Criteria. This is Chapter 3 from the revised Section 508 report, so you'll have to scroll through some things. But this is an absolutely fantastic resource because it identifies in kind of short, kind of one lines, the barriers that somebody, for instance, who's deaf or hard of hearing might face in using the product. And we'll look at an actual ACR in just a second, so you'll understand this a bit better. And then the last thing to do, if you have time, is to actually go through all of the criteria, not just that summary, and look at the criteria that does not support or partially supports. And if you're ever unsure about why a criterion is important or what that criterion means, in the templates that we've provided previously, all of those criterion are hyperlinked. So you can click it, it takes you to a page that has additional information about understanding that criterion and also understanding how to meet it. So it does provide some additional context. So what does an ACR actually look like? If you want to look at a lot of them, you can go to Microsoft or Adobe. They have ACRs publicly available for all of their products. Trying to pick something a little bit more relevant to us, I'm actually going to look at SpringShare's LibGuides, and this is also publicly available. You will just need to log in, so that's why it's not hyperlinked. So this is LibShare's accessibility conformance report. So first thing you do, make sure it's for the right product, look at the report date. This is super recent, so absolutely fantastic. And it's also based on the correct version of the VPAT. You can see here that it has level A and level AA web content accessibility guideline standards, but not level AAA. And this is pretty normal. So level A is the basic bare minimum. AA is typically industry standard, and then AAA is what we're moving towards. So you're really looking for at least AA. You then scroll down, and it'll be a lot of scrolling, but you go through, all of this is the WCAG standards, and then you'll get to the start of the Section 508 report. And this is a functional performance criteria. Like I said, it's a fantastic starting point, particularly if you're unfamiliar with digital accessibility. So it has the criteria. So is this software accessible for individuals without vision, with limited vision, without perception of color? And then it continues on to the next page as well. And then it tells you the level. Does it support or only partially support? And it provides an explanation. So always read the remarks and explanations because that provides you with additional information about what the deficiency actually is. So that way you can start planning ahead and figure out, okay, how are we going to mitigate this? And sometimes you get really lucky. And what you'll see is something like, we are currently in the process of expanding our use of name and role elements to reach full conformance. And in that case, you just make a note to follow up with the vendor and see how far they've actually gotten. Sometimes you check back in with them and it's not even a problem anymore because they've already done the work. Once you've looked at this, if you have time, go back and look at each of the WCAG criteria individually. So we'll go back to the beginning here. Sorry for scrolling so much. We see it supports. You'll have some where it's just not applicable at all. So for instance, LibGuides doesn't use any audio or video only content. So this just doesn't apply to them. And you'll find some areas for there's only partially supports, in which case you can look at that and, like I said, figure out what the shortcomings are, so that way you can start looking ahead and start thinking about mitigation. So some of the common deficiencies that we see are barriers to screen reader use, insufficient contrast, a lack of captioning, and also a lack of keyboard navigation, which often overlaps with barriers to screen reader use. Once you've identified the deficiencies, you should think about your next steps. So if there are alternatives to the product you're looking at, explore those if there are a lot of deficiencies. If you have a choice between an accessible product and a non-accessible product, go with the accessible one. However, I know oftentimes there's not alternatives available. So you can also think about who will be using the product. Is it for a limited audience or a large audience? Also think about the nature of the audience as well. So for instance, sometimes I review ACRs for flight simulation software that will be used by aviation students. And these are students who have to meet FAA regulations related to their health. So the fact that the software isn't accessible for individuals with vision impairments isn't something that I'm typically too concerned about in this context because of those FAA guidelines and requirements. So something just to keep in mind when you're evaluating what to do once you've identified the deficiencies. But the biggest step is identifying how you can provide equally effective alternative access.
And that is where the alternative accessibility plan comes in. And this is that mitigation step where you're like, what can I do to provide alternatives? What might be needed if someone comes to me and says, this item is not accessible. I saw, we're going to talk about this in a minute. I saw on your public notice that I should contact you about this. So the first thing you need to think about is, what do you have available to you right now? So let's say, you're looking at, do I have, does the campus have screen reader software that the student could or should be using? Do we have captioning software? Or do we maybe have a third party that will caption, that we send things out to caption? Can we send this out to a third party and pay them? Do we have access to OCR software? Is this something that is, small enough that we can do quick OCRs on it? Double check to make sure that it's correct. Do we have PDF editors to make PDFs accessible? What's available online? So there are other resources and other places. So this goes back to, don't be afraid to ask communities. There are things like the Job Accommodation Network. We have it linked here, and it's also linked in our resources page in these slides, which has a myriad of resources and information about very specific accommodations for people. And so look at that and say, oh, what if somebody needing this accommodation comes in? Look that up and just kind of have that in mind, that these are things that I can use. What about the vendors' remediation efforts? So like Beth said, sometimes they already have remediation or a roadmap in mind. Check in with them and said, hey, you said you were going to fix this, or this, you noted that this was a problem. Have you fixed it? Because maybe they have an accessible version that you can let the student know. Maybe that has changed, what you have has changed in 6 months or a year. And then internally, so if you can't think, I don't know if I have access to OCR, I don't know if I have access to captioning software, ask on your campus, check in with your organization's IT, check in with your organization's disability services. They may have things that you don't even know are available, or they may be able to find something and say, hey, we need this kind of thing on campus. This is, or in our organization, this is going to be happening. So this is about looking today at what you might need, and you're not going to think of everything all the time. Yeah. And these aren't, necessarily about this particular vendor. These are things that you can use for a wide variety of vendors, and it's having them in your back pocket so that okay, I have these things taken care of. So if something that you weren't expecting comes up, it's not as much of a scramble where you like already have this. Oh, now I can add this to my bank of things that I know. So to kind of think of it that way. We also do tracking internally. So when Beth sends me the ACR documentation for deficiencies, I add it to this tracking. So it keeps me up to date at a glance. That's why I keep it. I use Airtable. You can use a spreadsheet, a database, whatever works for you. But it keeps me updated at a glance on all my vendors, all my subscriptions. What do they have? What do they need? What's missing? And find out what's useful for your organization. I track the status. So if it's sufficient or insufficient, a reminder that I need to check yearly. The date that the ACR was, and Beth showed us where to find that, the date that it was completed. Any notes you have, you can see here, I have a note to follow up with the publisher. So this is where I would put that note that Beth mentioned about, hey, they have this remediation thing. I need to check in with them in 6 months. Where are you on this roadmap? An actual copy of the ACR, so I don't have them in like 10 different folders all over the place. The list of insufficiencies from Beth and the date that I received it from Beth from her assessment. And then sometimes they will give us workarounds. So we've had a vendor that said, okay, so it's not accessible if they're trying to view it online, but if they download the PDF is accessible to screen readers. So I will put that in there too, so that's part of my remediation for that particular vendor. The other ones, I keep, just in a list of things for general ones, but if a vendor gives me a specific one, I'm going to make note of that so I don't forget when somebody comes to me. Go ahead, next slide. We also do public notices. So this is in our discovery layer, we use Primo. At the point of need, I put what the deficiencies are, when we reviewed it internally, and I give them a link to our accessibility statement. And that page also includes my direct contact information and how to contact me for assistance, so that they have something concrete and someone individually that they can go to. And I really encourage everybody to have or find the accessibility statement on your organization's website. And if you are the one that needs to be contacted, or you are, find out who should be contacted and make sure that's listed there as well. And then we have our list of resources, which, as Beth said, are all individually linked. So you will be able to access those and click on those from our slides as well.
And then I believe it's time for questions now, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you both. Those are both really great presentations. Attendees, if you have those questions, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A now. I guess just some comments while we're waiting for some questions to come in. Both presentations, I really appreciated how you scaffolded first presentation, kind of like the thoughtfulness of creating your tool and outlining what digital safety really looks like, and kind of calling into the forefront about that ability, the speed of being able to switch out of a screen to have that safety was such a good reminder of what considerations and creating specific tools. So I really appreciated that being called out, and how I might be able to design some things on the campus that I work on too. So
just to respond, yeah, that was something that came out of our consultation, that we were like, oh yeah, okay, like we were thinking about ways in LibGuides, how like you can have maybe scrolling or specific like safety tabs, but yeah, so that was sort of a light bulb moment for us too. Like,
yeah, for me too,
like I wouldn't
totally.
even think
Thank you for passing that on.
And to just add on to that, I mean, I know we've talked about interdepartmental collaboration, but look at other places on your organization's website. So I know that the UN Title IX office has one, but if there's any sort of, sexual harassment resources, or sometimes disability services has them, so that way you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Somebody in your organization probably already has paid someone to make that button. So if you can just utilize it, it saves time and resources.
Also, quick note on the campus that I work on, we've created safety zones all over the school, so we can post where students can go at any point in each building. There's staff members that have these signs on their door, so that can be not necessarily related to gender, but if there's any bullying, intimate partner situations, just feeling unsafe on campus as it is, it doesn't have to necessarily be called out to, as you're saying, try to identify people and put them in that situation. But I know that that's been really helpful on our campus as well. It's awesome that you have the Q Center, and we don't have something specifically called that, but I'm envious.
Yeah, we have a really awesome student union organization at the U of C, and the Q Center's great, and they've been a dream to work with. And yeah, and just responding to what you were saying, Beth, we have our institutional website has so many accessibility issues. Like whenever Sydney and I are trying to do like LibGuides or websites, we're just like, oh my gosh, this is so not WCAG compliant. So that was a thing we had to move outside of, move into a new tool, ThingLink, which again, just to clarify, is a sort of platform that we subscribe to and adopted at the library to do a lot of virtual tours and orientations that we've really, we found extremely useful, and has we were just looking at pretty awesome accessibility options as well. So.
Ooh, we've got a question. For the digital relations team, will you be sharing your PowerPoint or resources? I appreciate your incredible work for the community. It's inspiring.
Thank you. Yes, I think we can put it up on the SCED, right? So we will work on doing that.
Yep, absolutely. Hang out a little bit while I answer questions. Let's see. Oh, and we can add them to the website afterwards too. So as a companion to the presentation when it will be posted. And then before time rolls down, I want to quick post this into the chat and remind everybody that we do appreciate your feedback on the presentations and the sessions that we're offering. And I just dropped a link into the chat about how you can give us feedback on this session. Okay, another question from Mark. I might have misheard, but I think you said WK compliant. What is that?
So,
oh, Beth, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I mean, I've heard it pronounced different ways, but it's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. I typically abbreviate it as WCAG. I think, Alexandra, how did you? I've heard both ways.
I think it's the WCAG. I never know.
But all that is it's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, basically an international standard for accessibility. And those are available on our slide deck.
Awesome. You gotta love those professional acronyms and jargon. Okay. And Mark says, thank you. Okay, 1 minute left. Any other burning questions we can get to here? I mean, I feel like I could have a discussion that lasted an hour with each of you, but Really appreciate the good information that you shared today. Really thought-provoking, at least for what I would like to take back to my area of practice. And we'll wrap this session up. Thank you all for attending.